All right, everyone, here we go with nerves of the oral cavity. This lecture is going to be a little bit longer than the muscles and may seem a little bit more complicated, but please try to make this, and I will try to make this as easy as possible. First of all, we need to start out with an overview of the nervous system. So how do the nerves work? This is on page 69 to 72 in your MDA textbook. So read that section for sure. And it's an overview of how the nervous system works. There are two main divisions of the nervous system. Now, our nerves are based in or have their central location in the spine, as you probably already know. So the central location is called the central nervous system. Easy. So the central nervous system, the CNS, and it includes the brain. Okay, so it's the base of the brain and the spinal cord. So CNS, two parts, brain and spinal cord. Obviously, central means in the middle, so pretty easy here. Central nervous system includes all of this main component here, your brain and your spinal cord, and all the nerves branch out from there. Then the second part of your nervous system, after we've got the central nervous system, the parts that branch out, or the nerves that branch out, are called the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. Now the word peripheral means to the side, or another derivative of that you would hear is periphery. When we get to doing impressions, we might put some wax around the edge or border of the impression tray, and that's called periphery wax, or wax that you're putting on the edge or the border. So peripheral nervous system are the nerves, so peripheral nerves, that would be on the outside of the central nervous system. Easy. Now there are two types of peripheral nerves. The autonomic nervous system, which is, as the word kind of connotates, autonomic or automatic, that's unconscious activity. So that would be things like the heart beating, the nerves of the heart, things that you don't have to, the nerves in the stomach, things you don't have to think about to control. And then we have the somatic nervous system, which are things that are conscious activities like swallowing, moving the tongue, those kinds of things. So that would be conscious activities. So just quick overview, the central nervous system has two main divisions. Central nervous system is called the CNS, includes the brain and the spinal cord, and then everything that branches off from that is called the peripheral nervous system, and there's two types, those that happen automatically, autonomic nervous system, and those that happen by conscious effort, which is called somatic nervous system. We need to understand the basic cell of the nervous system, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before, that it's called a neuron. Neuron is the basic cell of the nervous system, and it's responsible for sending messages throughout the body. There are three types, and again, this should be a review. There are sensory. They send messages to the brain from the sense organs. So we talked about this in class. You touch a hot stove. How do you know to move your hand? Well, a message gets sent from your hand to your brain saying hot, hot, hot. And then there are motor neurons that send messages from your brain to your hand to say, move that hand, move that hand. Okay, so the sensory send messages to the brain from the sense organ. Motor send messages from the brain to the sense organ. And then there are associated neurons that send messages between the sensory and motor neurons. Again, this should be review. There are 12 cranial nerves, and they're actually pairs. So there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves, nerves that go from the spinal cord into the head. They are both sensory and motor in function. They do both. They send those pairs of nerves, both send messages to the brain and send messages to the sense organs. And notice that they're all listed by Roman numerals. You definitely need to, if you don't already know Roman numerals. Now, we've used Roman numerals 1 through 6 before. I don't think we've gotten higher than 6 in any use of Roman numerals. So definitely know how to do these Roman numerals at least up to 12 at this point. And we can go over that if you like. Just let me know and I'm happy to review that if you need to. But there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. They're both sensory and motor in function, and they're listed by Roman numerals. You'll also see a picture of this on page 126 in your MDA textbook. The good news is the only one we really need to worry about or care about or know about at this point is the 5th cranial nerve. So again, Roman numeral 5 is a V, and the 5th cranial nerve is from the mouth and to the jaw muscles. So mouth and jaws is the 5th cranial nerve, and that is called the trigeminal nerve. Make sure you know that name, the trigeminal nerve. Now, does this sound familiar? It should, because I believe Mrs. Lane has already gone over this with you in chairside when we were talking about anesthesia, because obviously when we are giving anesthesia to a patient, we're anesthetizing their nerves. We're blocking these nerves from telling the brain there is pain. So some of this will be review. This is everything we are going to learn through the rest of this podcast. It's an outline of the nervous system. The 5th cranial nerve, the only one we care about, is the trigeminal nerve. Off of the trigeminal nerve, there are 3 main branches called the ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular, and there's a bunch of branches off of those that we're going to learn about. This is on page 124 and 125 in your textbook. Read over that as well. And whether you read over the textbook first before listening to the podcast or vice versa, whichever way helps you. Think of the nervous system like a tree. The spine is the trunk of the tree, and there are branches off that trunk. And those branches have branches, and those branches have branches, and so on and so on. Go outside real quick and look at a tree. Look at the main branch of a tree. So the trunk of the tree, and then look at what are the main branches off of that. And then off of each main branch, there are other branches, and that's how your nervous system works. So we've got the spine, and then we have 12 cranial nerves. So there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves that go from the spine up to the head. Again, the only one we care about is the 5th cranial nerve, which is called the trigeminal. And then off the trigeminal nerve, there are 3 main branches: the ophthalmic, the maxillary, and the mandibular. We're going to pull those 3 main branches apart. So again, the trigeminal nerve has 3 main branches, the first one being the ophthalmic. And that is pronounced off, like PH sounds like an F, ophthalmic. It serves the eyes, nose, and forehead. Then we have the maxillary branch that obviously provides nerves to the upper arch. Then we have the mandibular branch that provides nerves to the lower arch. Here's another picture of the same thing. I found a picture on the internet of 3 branches of a tree. So again, same thing, just reviewing, driving home the same ideas. The spine is your main trunk, the central nervous system. Off of that, there are 12 branches that go into the cranium or into the skull. The one that's numbered 5 with a Roman numeral V is called the trigeminal nerve. And off of the trigeminal nerve, there are 3 main branches: ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular. Off of each one of those, there are various branches off of each one of those, and that's what we're going to go over next. Here's another picture of the same thing. The trigeminal nerve, the fifth cranial nerve. There are three main branches. The one that is most superior or highest is the ophthalmic, which again serves the eyes, nose, forehead. The maxillary branch, upper teeth, mandibular branch, lower teeth. The first one we're going to talk about is the ophthalmic. And the only thing you need to know is what I've already told you about the ophthalmic nerve is a branch off of the trigeminal nerve, and it serves the eyes, the nose, and the forehead. We don't care so much about the eyes, nose, and forehead in dentistry. I mean, obviously we care, but we're not dealing so much with that. And that's all you need to know about the ophthalmic nerve. Know that it's connected to the trigeminal, which serves the oral cavity. It's one of the three main branches, and it's nerves or innervates, provides feeling to the eyes, nose, and forehead. All right, the second one is the maxillary nerve. Of course, we're going to spend a little bit more time on this one. The maxillary nerve, or the maxillary branch of the trigeminal nerve, supplies or provides nerves for the upper teeth, obviously. The periosteum, remember periosteum, pull that apart, peri around, osteo means bone, so the tissues around the bone of the upper teeth. So all of these tissues up here around the bone. It also provides sensation to the maxillary sinuses. The soft palate, as you can see here, and we talked about that last week, and the mucous membranes, again, the lining of the oral cavity around the upper arch. Now, this maxillary branch or maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve has 5 branches of its own. You already know 3 of them. You may not think you know 3 of them, but you do. This picture is provided for you on is figure 923 in your MDA textbook. That's on page 127. It's the top figure and it's the picture on the left. Now what I have done is I have blocked off some of the things we're not concentrating on here, here in this picture, so that you don't get confused by other information. We're just concentrating here on the maxillary division. So this upper branch, and that comes this way. And then off of that maxillary branch, we've got 5 branches that kind of come off of that. And we're going to learn about those here. The first 2 branches of the maxillary nerve serve the roof of the mouth. So the palate, which again we talked about last week. There's the nasopalatine nerve and the anterior palatine nerve. The nasopalatine, let's pull that apart again. Naso, what does that make you think about? Nose. So it'd be closest to the nose, and of course palatine, roof of the mouth. So the nasopalatine nerve is the nerve here that innervates this area right here where these little bumps are, and we learned what those bumps were last week, right? The rugae. So this nerve goes through a hole in the roof of the mouth, which we also learned about last week, called the incisive foramen. So the incisive foramen is a hole in the bone right here, and the nasopalatine nerves go through that hole and they branch out kind of like a spider up here on the roof of the mouth, and that is called the nasopalatine nerve. So when you bite into a real hot pizza or a Hot Pocket like I did, and you burn the roof of your mouth, it's those nasopalatine nerves that are telling your brain, pain, 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 pain. Ouch. Then we have the anterior palatine nerve. Now this is a weird one. This is an anomaly, and I don't know why they called this the anterior palatine nerve. If it were me, if I were naming these, I would have named the nasopalatine nerve the anterior palatine nerve, because as you can see here in this second picture, the anterior palatine nerve is where? It's not anterior, it's posterior. So maybe I would have called it the posterior palatine nerve. I don't know why that happened, and I hate that because it doesn't follow the rule and it can certainly confuse you. So the anterior palatine nerve, unfortunately, is not anterior. It passes through the posterior palatine foramen. Remember, we talked about these. There were two foramens back here. Greater and lesser palatine foramens are back here. And I'll show you that on the next picture. It moves forward over the palate and meets the nasopalatine nerve. So we've got the anterior palatine nerve covers the rest of the palate. Nasopalatine is in the front, anterior palatine either side on the back, covering the rest of the palate. Here's another picture of the same thing, and this is on page 127 in your textbook, figure 924 on the bottom left. The nasopalatine nerve here in the upper front, going through the incisive foramen, the hole in the bone there. And then we have the anterior palatine nerve, and that's going through the greater, larger one, and lesser, smaller, palatine foramen that are at the back of the throat. So those are the first two branches off of the maxillary nerve. We have three more to go, and these three you already know. The posterior superior alveolar nerve. Again, posterior towards the back, superior above, alveolar area around the mouth. So this nerve supplies or serves the upper posterior teeth or upper molars. Trigeminal nerve coming through, maxillary nerve, and then we have the posterior, right here, superior alveolar nerve. So that is the nerve that brings nerves into the apex or apices of your upper molars. Then we have the middle superior alveolar nerve. The middle superior alveolar nerve provides the sensation for the, you already know this, premolars. Okay, so it's coming here, providing for the premolars, and you can't really see my green I'm drawing here, but anyway, for the premolars. And remember, this has an anomaly. What is that anomaly or difference? Something that's a little different. Anomaly with the middle superior alveolar nerve. So it's the two premolars, but it also is the mesial buccal. Notice here, let me erase all this. Hold, please. Notice here that if you look closely at the nerve, here's the two premolars, and then here, notice there is a little branch that comes off of the middle superior alveolar nerve that serves the mesial buccal root of the upper first molar. The mesial buccal root of the upper first molar. So that would be teeth numbers 3 and 14. So if your doctor was going to do a root canal, for example, on teeth numbers 3 and 14, how many injections would the doctor probably give? At least 3. One in the posterior superior alveolar nerve, one in the middle superior alveolar nerve, and then they might even do a palatal nerve into the anterior palatine nerve on the lingual side for that buccal, or excuse me, for that palatine root or the lingual root of that tooth to make sure the tooth is totally, completely numb, especially when we're doing a root canal and we're actually working into the nerve of the tooth. Then we have the anterior superior alveolar nerve, and that is the nerve, let me get here, that is the nerve here that goes to the front teeth. Anterior superior alveolar nerve goes to all of your anterior teeth, which would be which ones? Centrals, laterals, and cuspids. So these you already know, that should have been review. Let's put it all together again. Maxillary branch, there are 5 divisions. There's 2 that go to the palate and 3 that go to the teeth. The two that go to the palate are the nasopalatine that's behind the upper anterior teeth. They pass through the incisive foramen. Then you have the anterior palatine nerve that serves the rest of the palate, and those nerves go through the greater and lesser palatine foramen. And then you have the three that serve the teeth, the posterior superior alveolar that serves the upper molars, the middle superior alveolar that provides nerves to the premolars or bicuspids, and the mesial buccal root of the upper first molars, number 3 and 14, and then the anterior superior alveolar nerve that provides nerves to the upper anterior teeth. Again, one more way to review this information, maxillary division. Remember, there's 3 branches off of the trigeminal: ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular. So we're talking about that second main branch, the maxillary division. 5 branches off of that: the nasopalatine, the anterior palatine, the posterior superior, the middle superior, and the anterior superior. All right, and all we have left is the mandibular nerve. The mandibular nerve obviously goes to your mandible, and there's a few branches off of that one. The mandibular nerve has 3 main divisions. Now this picture here is on the right side of figure 923 on page 127 of your MDA textbook. The 3 main divisions include, first, the buccal nerve. The buccal nerve, as you know what the term buccal means, buccal is on the outside, so you can see in this drawing here, the buccal nerve is going to provide sensation to the outside of the lower anterior teeth. So it supplies the buccal mucosa and the periosteum of the, now notice this says maxillary and mandibular molars. Now this is kind of a weird anomaly. This is the mandibular branch. So this is here, mandibular division is going down here, but off that mandibular division, there's actually some nerves that go wayward and go to the upper buccal mucosa. So this buccal nerve serves the buccal mucosa and periosteum around the maxillary and mandibular molars. The lingual nerve is the second division of the mandibular branch, and that lingual nerve obviously goes where? Well, lingual would be the correct answer. Easy breezy. So here's your lingual nerve. Okay, and it's coming down here, and it provides sensation to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue and the lingual mucosa and periosteum. And then the third branch of the mandibular nerve, you already know, the inferior alveolar nerve. This nerve is the main nerve that we get numb when we do a block injection on the lower arch, and as you can see here, the syringe injecting into the inferior alveolar nerve. And that is, oops, I wrote over it, but anyway, inferior alveolar nerve, and this comes down and it supplies basically all of the teeth of the lower arch. This nerve goes, and again, here's on this side, you can see the inferior alveolar nerve, and that comes down here and supplies all of the lower teeth. Off of the inferior alveolar nerve, there are lots of nerves that branch off of there, and there's really only 2 that you need to know about. Those 2 actually go to the chin area. So the inferior alveolar nerve comes down here off of the mandibular nerve. It provides nerves that go into the apex of all the lower teeth. But when we get down here to the anterior teeth, there are other branches, 2 called, or one of them is the mental nerve, and we already have the word mental, so you can imagine where that goes to. The mental nerve supplies the chin and membrane of the lower lip. And then the incisive nerve that supplies nerves to the lower anterior teeth. So these lower anterior teeth are actually coming off of a branch of the inferior alveolar nerve called the incisive nerve. With the mandibular branch, just make sure you know, or with the inferior alveolar nerve, with this inferior alveolar nerve, the tongue, the cheeks, and the lips usually get numb when the inferior alveolar nerve is anesthetized. So if you've ever had dental work done and you've had a filling on your lower teeth, usually that is when you're going to feel like your tongue and your lip and your cheeks are all numb. You might bite your tongue. If you've ever had work on your upper teeth, you probably didn't have that sensation, because when we inject in the upper arch, it does not get the tongue and the lip numb typically, or the lower lip at least, typically. So the tongue being innervated on the from the mandibular branch. So here is a review of the mandibular branch. Again, it has 3 divisions: the buccal nerve that supplies the buccal mucosa and periosteum around the maxillary and mandibular molars, the lingual nerve that supplies the anterior 2/3 of the tongue and the lingual mucosa and periosteum, and then the inferior alveolar nerve. And the 2 branches off of that you need to know are the mental nerve and the incisive nerve, both which go to the chin area. Here's a picture of the same thing, and you've got a picture of this on page 127, figure 924 on the right hand side. The mandibular division off of the trigeminal nerve. We have 3 main divisions off of that: the buccal, the lingual, and the inferior alveolar nerve. And off of the inferior alveolar nerve, we've got 2 main branches, the incisive and the mental, foramen and nerves, mental nerve. Now, let me say, we've learned about a number of nerves here, but obviously, as in the picture of the muscles, remember that first picture of the muscles that I showed you with probably 40 muscles, and we only need to memorize a few of those? The same thing applies here with the nerves. We have not learned all of the nerves of the oral cavity or all of the nerves of branching off of the 5th cranial nerve. Just the most important ones and the only ones you need to memorize at this point. Here's another picture of the same exact thing, the mandibular nerve coming down off of the trigeminal nerve. And then we have the buccal that comes here. You can see it's serving the buccal mucosa of the upper and lower anterior teeth. Then we have the lingual nerve that's coming here and goes lingual, so it gets the tongue. And then we have the inferior alveolar nerve, which is this one right here, and they kind of cut it off, but this goes down and around. I just threw in this picture just because it's very interesting and maybe brings to light, instead of it being drawings, this is an actual cadaver showing the nerves and arteries. Pretty cool how it actually looks in the mouth. So again, here is the outline that I showed you towards the beginning of this lecture of everything we were going to learn. I'm just going to talk it through one more time. So remember, we've got 12 pairs of cranial nerves. The only one we're really concerned about is the 5th cranial nerve, which is Roman numeral 5, called the trigeminal nerve. Off of the trigeminal nerve, there are 3 main branches: the ophthalmic that goes to the eyes, nose, and forehead, and that's the only thing we need to know about that one. The maxillary that has 5 divisions, 2 that go to the roof of the mouth and 3 that go to the teeth. The 2 that go to the roof of the mouth, the nasopalatine and anterior palatine, and the 3 that go to the teeth, which you already learned, anterior superior, middle superior, and posterior superior alveolar nerves. And then the 3rd main branch off of the trigeminal nerve is the mandibular nerve, and there are 3 main branches off of that: the buccal nerve, the lingual nerve, and the inferior alveolar nerve, which provides the sensation to all the lower teeth. And notice here I have 4 divisions off of that. In the previous part of the lecture here, I only gave you 2, the mental nerve and the incisive nerve. this was from an older lecture, and I cut out the mylohyoid nerve and the small dental nerves because you really don't need to know those. That never comes up again later. So don't waste brain space on those two. So the inferior alveolar nerve, the only two you need to memorize off of there are the mental nerve and the incisive nerve. And again, this is the basics of the nervous system of the oral cavity. Again, there are many, many other nerves, but this is the basics, and this is all you need to know. And lastly, in addition to filling out the worksheet that you just filled out in listening to this podcast, I want you to draw on a piece of paper, and you don't have to make it elaborate or anything, but use this as a way for you to learn this information. Obviously, this should not be busy work, but draw your own fifth cranial nerve. Draw an oral cavity, and I'm not going to grade it on your drawing ability, trust me. I can't draw anything but stick figures, so please don't worry about making it anywhere near anatomically correct. But what I want you to do is draw the oral cavity and draw the fifth cranial nerve, the 3 branches off of that, and the branches off of those that we just learned. Use different colors. Do it in such a way that is going to help you remember. You can use it to study with and help you remember this information. Attach that to both worksheets for this week's homework. All right, and that's it. We're done. Happy day. Hope you're having a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.